KoitCast.
Today's guest is a retired Navy nuclear engineer, IT entrepreneur, mystic, author, and lifelong seeker of the extraordinary. Over the years, his experiences with UFOs, CE5 contact, near-death experiences, and the imaginal realm have shaped his innovative philosophy. A big Koit welcome to Kevin Cann. Hi Kevin, welcome to KoitCast.
Hi Paul, it's a real pleasure.
Thank you ever so much for coming. It's always much appreciated when people give up their time, so thank you for doing so. Just give everyone a grounding who's watching and or listening to this. Who are you? Where are you from? Etc. No pressure.
I could talk about that for half an hour. But to keep it very focused to frame our conversation, I'm a high-functioning autistic person that was born in the Bible Belt in Minnesota in the 60s. So, they didn't know what to do with a high-functioning autistic person in the Bible Belt in the 60s. And I had a long and interesting, I've had a long and interesting life. I was a nuclear engineer, had various adventures, and I'm going to skip ahead to the very end. We're just framing this very briefly. I've been a lifelong experiencer, as they call it nowadays. And at the very end, I met famous people. Like I spent the day with Jacques Vallée, compared notes with him. Yeah, very wonderful gentleman. And eventually, I kind of I had some years in a Kundalini yoga organization that researched that with a focus on science. And finally, I wound up becoming bestest of friends with Jeff Kripal from Rice University, the very wonderful person that he is, History of Religion. And we wrote a book together, How to Think Impossibly about God, Souls, UFOs, and all that, whatever the subtitle is. And we spent 2 years together working on that book. And we've stayed in close collaboration ever since. Originally, I had wanted to simply be referred to as Kevin in the book. I didn't want to come out. I was working for the University of California at the time, and I didn't want my, quote, weirdness to impinge upon my job in the university. But after I retired in July of last year, I came out of the closet, the mystical closet in this case.
Do you think if you had have portrayed your weirdness out there, would you have been sanctioned or fired or whatever?
I don't believe so. I have the highest respect for the University of California. They fully support diversity to this day, freedom of thought. But I just didn't want to risk embarrassing anyone.
Okay.
Or I didn't want what I do, my quote real self, beneath the Clark Kent clothing, to interfere with my job as an IT professional, which I was for 31 years.
No, that's fair enough. I understand. In a way, I'm in a similar position in that if I really released a lot of my thoughts and that, things are detrimental to my other life. So I keep off the record. I'm always intrigued by what people's introduction to the paranormal world is. So what was your first encounter with whatever you deem as weird?
I was aware in the womb, and and people go,
Really?
oh, he's going to say he's like some walk-in mystical master. No, I'm not saying that at all. I'm saying, and this is something I want people to really keep in mind about me. I'm 50% science and I'm 50%, let's call it creative thought. And I'd like the two to be merged together. It is known that people with high functioning autism can have early abnormal brain development and even be aware in the womb. There's been studies of it. So I'm not claiming any mystical stuff there, but what's quite interesting is that the science and the mysticism actually support each other. So are these, mystical greats from the past, are they autistics too? And they are. Actually, if you look on my website, I'm always a bit of a firebrand, you know. On my website, one of the first articles when I put it up, shameless plug, platonicsurrealism.com is my website. One of the first articles I put up is, was Jesus autistic? See, there's
Nice.
some folks that may not care for that, but if you look back, I mean, for example, I'll list another figure here, and I will get back to your question, sir, but this is such a great opportunity to explore this. I was in an organization founded by Gopi Krishna, the Hindu, some people would call saint. And, I got into a lot of trouble with that outfit when I was in it. In fact, I got shown the door because it was their job to research a scientific explanation for what the Kundalini phenomenon is. And I gave them my analysis, and one of my main analysis was that Gopi Krishna was a high functioning autistic. And they didn't like that because that meant he had a genetic fault. I mean, you don't pick on someone's God man, right? You're going to get in
Mm.
trouble.
Well, because they're
And but
perfect,
if
aren't they? So you can't go
Yeah,
against that. Yeah.
right. But if you look at his life history, it just screams that he had high functioning autism. So I've explored that a lot. But to go back to your question, so I was aware in the womb, and I felt a great golden power all around me when I was young, up to about the age of 7. Now, see, here's more science for you. The brain starts pruning excess neural connections as part of its regular developmental path around the age of 7. So I felt the presence that I'd always known kind of fading after I hit around 7. And then that really explains the rest of my life because I wanted it back. It
Mm.
made me feel complete because I'd known it, you know. And anyway, when I was young, I did have a lot of paranormal experiences with entities, and they were mostly Egyptian. Uh, what's a boy in Minnesota? Minnesota farm boy. I lived on a farm. What's a Minnesota farm boy supposed to think about crocodile and ibis-headed entities surrounding him at night? I mean, while awake and all during the day too. And they would kind of nip at me. I could feel them nipping at my skin. That's how real they were.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
When you say nipping at
So
you, literally like with this or with the mouth, what are they doing? Or are they just touching you
it was
instead?
prickling, like maybe some bugs were
Oh, I
eating
see.
my skin. Yeah. And actually, as it turns out, there was more to that than I knew at the time. But we'll have to talk about Robert Temple's book about plasma. It was all involved there.
I see. I get
But
where you're going with that. Yeah. So
yeah,
this awareness in the womb, right? I'm going to be stuck on it in my mind a bit here because it's a new one for me to explore, and I like new territory for me to explore. What was your awareness? What are you aware of?
I felt like my true self was of unbound scope and that I had friends who were glowing and filled the whole universe and beyond. That's
Okay,
what my
so
true
you
nature
weren't trapped
was.
in a body, so to speak. You were aware of the bigger realm.
Right, right.
Interesting. Nice. Yeah, I also like what you said about the pathways being sort of like disconnected up to the age of 7 because you hear this a lot about people that like a reincarnation kids. That's an example that they'll come in and then
Right.
they forget around 6 or 7, 8 years old, and so that you've put it in a nice way that sort of pathways are being closed off and we're being forced into the narrow tunnel of humanity, so to speak, and that's what it
It's
was for you.
actually a genetic thing. No, I
Yeah.
mean, the brain has excess neural connections and nature is thrifty. If something isn't used, it has to be minimized or discarded or not emphasized so that the bodily resources can be put to where they belong. You can read up on it. It's just
Yeah.
standard science.
Well, it's interesting, isn't it, that we have that then ability, in theory, not to prune those things.
If you work hard at it, you can retain it somewhat.
Hmm. I
And
like
that's what
that.
I did, of course. You got to
Amazing.
keep those things active, you see. If you're a super precocious child, you might wind up on like the telepathy tapes. See,
Yeah, yeah.
that's what that is.
I've heard a lot of that recently. I watched a few of those YouTube shows on that recently. Very, very interesting. These Egyptian, animal headed gods and stuff, or entities, whatever they are. Did you have any interaction with Egyptian stuff prior to them appearing to you? I.e., was it coloured in your mind that these are there, so to speak, or did you just, ooh, there they are?
Yeah, and most people would give you a bullshit answer, but I don't believe in bullshitting anyone. There was one time when I was young, I saw a National Geographic with pictures like that. Could that
Okay.
have flooded my mind? Certainly, it could have, but I later saw things that were never in a National Geographic. Now, could that have been just the imagination of a child? Well, I suppose that what it really comes down to is that the form doesn't matter because the trickster element is always changing shape. So, it's like Jacques Vallée said, for thousands of years, people believed in elves or fairies or nature spirits, so that's what they saw. You know, in the late 1800s, people were amazed by airships, so they saw mystery airships in the sky, and now everything has to be UFO, so that we can shoot at it, so that the Americans can pretend they have higher technology than the Russians. That all started around 1952, a program to do that.
Yeah, no, I get you. I've spoken to. Have you ever spoken to Steve Mira before?
No, sir.
Okay, it's a trope within the paranormal world that there's like masks of the entities. It's the same thing. Everything is the same thing, and they just wear a different. It wears a different mask. So it could be
Right.
UFO, it can be spirit, it can be whatever, demon, etc.,
Right,
etc.
right, right, right.
Yeah, that's interesting. That. Another point here regarding the animal-headed Egyptian gods you mentioned. My girlfriend actually sees that occasionally. She saw her dad with a lion head and stuff. So it's a weird thing, but I wonder where it comes from, other than Egyptian gods.
Ah, well, you got to talk about Jung, the archetypes.
That's it,
These
archetype.
kind of images, see, these kind of images, there are people who say it's like the images are waiting for a human being to come along to perceive them, that they have an independent existence. And I'd say there's an element of truth to that. Now, one can wonder, you know, since there is no real solid arrow of time, quantum mechanics shows that time can go forward or backward or sideways. You know, if people think something is true for 1,000 years or 2,000 years and imagine it to be true, can that even leak into the past and people can see it? Who knows
Mm,
where this stuff is generated? Uh, One of the key concepts that I've been talking about on my recent interviews is that humans are like little spiritual batteries, and our imagination is very potent. That we generate what I call dream substance. Robert Temple would call it bioplasma, and I can go with either one, or you can call it Kundalini. It's all the same thing. So we generate these things that then come meet us. You know, I mean, for example, I'll say something extremely controversial here,
okay.
very controversial. Demons wouldn't exist if Christians hadn't invented them. You see,
Yeah.
for example, and I've done all the I don't just open my mouth like this. I do research to verify if what I'm saying is possibly true. If you go back, you can go all the way back to Ahura Mazda, whatever, early dualism, which had like unclean spirits, whatever. They had a few like Lilitu in Samaria going back, but really it wasn't a big concept for a long time, and it wasn't a big, But then Christianity latched onto it, and really, demons and the devil wasn't even really a solid thing till about 300, CE. There was currents of people thinking about dualistic things, wanting to blame demons, blame things on demons, but it never really got solidified, i.e., wasn't finished being created till about 300 CE. And as you probably know, since Well, you may or may not know. Originally, the Greeks talked about, and other cultures talked about daimones or daemon,
Hmm.
and they were like the muse. They were like nature spirits. They weren't evil. But a new religion always has to marginalize the previous religion by calling its stuff evil to differentiate itself. So Christianity created demons, and by their obsession with them and like witch trials and all this crazy stuff, their spiritual essence that's in every human being generated demons for them to encounter to go, see, look, I'm right, there's demons. Well, they made the demons. They didn't exist before they created them. Just like a lot of these UFOs we see, they didn't exist until people created them.
The same, obviously, for the alien occupants, then, presumably, all these events
Yes.
that occur with that. It is an interesting one for you, then. Obviously, if we are that powerful as a species that we can create what comes back to, haunt us, so to speak, is it possible that, like, if we had a million people into Star Wars, as an example, like I am, could we create an actual Darth Vader? I
That's
know that
always a
sounds
very
flippant, but
no, no, no. That's a very interesting question, and I will go somewhere a little teeny bit naughty, and just a teeny bit. So why aren't we being visited by porn stars in the sky? I mean, well, it's a
yeah,
valid question, right? People fantasize
yeah,
about porn stars, don't they?
good point. Yeah,
A lot of them, men do. I mean, there's two kinds of men: the ones who masturbate in the shower and those who lie. I'm just kidding. It's an old joke.
so true though.
Yes, yes. It's an interesting question, and I have an answer to that. You see, it's not out on the web yet. I filmed it a couple weeks ago. I went on New Thinking Aloud and I did a interview there about how to summon UFOs. And one of the key things to know is that you have to separate yourself from what you're trying to summon, or it'll never happen. You see, if you keep it inside of your energy generation system, so to speak, it will never fly out into the world and possibly seem real. So yeah, when people are thinking of Darth Vader or porn stars or whatever, they're keeping it inside their persona space, inside the generator shack of their beings, because they're attached to it. They, you see, the thing about UFOs that's very interesting and tricky is that they are supposedly separate from us, like from another planet, you see. So if you want to quote summon a UFO, you take this energy you've been generating, we've all been generating, you have to cut off your link to it so it can flow free and like appear in the sky, or else it'll just appear in your own personal imagination and never get out. That's why most things never. You see how tricky that is?
Yeah, it's almost impossible for my brain to fathom that. So you have to detach whatever you're trying to conjure, which is a very anti way of thinking to me.
Well, it's like sharing a dream. You see, if you won't share your dream, let's say you just go to sleep at night and you have a dream. Well, if you keep it to yourself, it's not going to affect anyone else, right?
Hmm.
Same thing here. You got to let it get out in the, let's call it the archetypal mind, in the shared conscious substrate of all human beings. You got to let it get out to that and not be selfish with it, and just keep it to yourself. And it's a trick because humans are pretty selfish. Not to knock humans, but it's just we had to be to survive.
Mm. Yes, it's part of our evolution to make sure we have resources, obviously, and therefore live. Um, well, obviously, the Darth Vader example I gave, as I said, I know it's kind of flippant, but I don't find myself attached to that one as an example because millions of people love Star Wars and millions of people probably think about Darth Vader. It's just I wonder how we could conjure him into real existence. Is
Well,
it
I
a
got
way
two things
by
to
we'd
say
have to
about
think
that.
about it and say bring him in?
Yeah. Well, you see, nobody thinks that they could just think hard about Darth Vader and he'd show up and knock on the door and want to be let in for a spot of tea. I mean, ask you to put the copper on and get him a biscuit. See, I'm doing my Anglophile thing here. I like the Brits. I've always liked the Brits.
Good man.
We watch those historical pieces and just love them. My wife especially.
Lush.
Um, so you'll notice that only when something is culturally allowed might it appear. For example, If people see the Virgin Mary, well, that's culturally allowed, right?
Mm.
If people see fairies back in, bonny old England, well, there was the fairy faith that was there for hundreds, if not 1,000 years, right? It was culturally allowed. See, we only tend to see culturally allowed expressions. That's why we don't see Darth Vader going around going all over the place, because that's not culturally allowed.
Okay. How is it not culturally allowed? Because I want him to be into the in the not killing people, obviously, but I want him to be going around going. What's the
Well,
not
there's,
allowed part of that? I don't understand that part.
ultimately, I would say that as powerful as a single human is, it's kind of the Jungian archetypal mind. You need like multiple people to have be on the same page, and
Sure.
that's why. Hey, this is really special to me. I want to make sure this gets out. So, can we just jump into UFOs a bit, and
Absolutely.
this will explain this very well. The place we find ourselves. So, you know, basically post World War II. Um, well, in World War II, there was a lot of deception done, like whole Panzer tank groupings that were actually cardboard boxes. You see, the military learned deception to manipulate people's minds in World War II. It's Sun Tzu, it's basic stuff. If you're going to have combat, you want to set the place and time and conditions of combat. And if you can confuse your enemy so that you don't have to spend resources, then you deceive them. So both sides, Allies and Axis, both got good at deception. And in America, okay, well let me set the stage a little better here. Um, After World War II, there was a lot of very bright people in Germany that the Americans and other countries wanted to get access to the old Operation Paperclip thing.
Hmm.
Well, what most people don't realize is that it wasn't just mainly Jewish physicists, etc., but also people that worked for Mengele and worked for the SS who were good at deception were also brought over and protected starting around 1952 by Allen Dulles when the CIA was formed. So these masters of deception were welcomed into the US government and protected and cherished, including the people who did like medical experiments on people like Mengele did.
Mm.
These people were all seeded into the US government, and there's records of it. The government doesn't like this knowledge to be out there. And really, the folks that they brought over eventually even got into things like, MK Ultra, which, per the Church Commission in Congress, it isn't just some conspiracy theory. It was a real thing, and they shut it down. At least they shut down that instance of it. It still exists to this day, of course. Another thing that the government doesn't want people to know. But um, you can even find a reference to that in Jacques' latest book, for Forbidden Science 6, where he got evidence that MK Ultra is still going. So, but back to the beginning of UFOs, and this is kind of a message I want to have out there for discussion to stimulate the public square, so to speak. So, of course, per like Jacques Vallée, you've had this supernatural stuff happening since humans existed, and we can get into that. But in terms of modern ufology, um, you had Kenneth Arnold, who saw things that were misquoted to be saucers around Mount Rainier. He never said they were flying saucers. He said they looked like, and he was trying to describe a picture that didn't come out for several years, actually. They're kind of a crescent kind of looking thing. But he said that they were moving like saucers skipping on water. So he was misquoted by the media that he had seen flying saucers. Well, he never saw any such thing. And as he later said, he felt that they were alive, you see. So they were alive and they never were flying saucers. See, this gets to this, you could either watch replays of, disclosure hearings in Congress, or you can just ask me because they'll give you bullshit and I'll tell you how it all happened. People like me. People like me. So he was misquoted, and then the media got into a frenzy about flying saucers. And there had been science fiction about ships from other planets and stuff. So it was socially acceptable to think this way because, Orson Welles, whatever, right? Ships from other planets, that sort of thing. So it's stuck in the public imagination. And then anything that gets stuck in the public imagination as real and cool, we live in this depressing world mostly. So anything that might come to save us, whether it be Jesus or aliens, gets stuck very easily in the public imagination. So a month later, when there was a crash at Roswell, and I'm not going to say what crashed. I'm pretty certain I know. I'm not going to say. I don't want any death threats from the Roswell people. There's two groups of people I discovered I don't want have mad at me. Generally, it's Christians. If I say like Jesus was autistic, they generally don't go around killing anymore so much as they once did. And don't say that Roswell wasn't a UFO crash from another planet because you'll get worse death threats. So I'm not going to say what crashed at Roswell, I know, but it doesn't matter what crashed there, you see. Because old Jesse Marcel got all excited. He thought, hey, yeah, it's got to be what this, Kenneth Arnold guy saw, right? It was in his mind, in his imagination. So he goes, oh, yeah, we got a saucer here, you see. The word saucer had never existed until a month before. So you see, it was stuck in his mind from the public imagination already. And so that's how we got UFOs. Some guy saw living beings flying and was misquoted. And that's why we've had UFOs ever since. The form of the destructor from Ghostbusters was chosen at that time. And it has since been the only socially acceptable thing to see. Because, science rules, the world is not enchanted anymore like it once was. And, we've been in space ourselves. So it's completely rationally possible that someone else in space, also was there and could come visit us. It's a socially acceptable outlet for the phenomenon. Now, here's the point I want to make. I want to make this point, and this is the thing that really kills me. So for years, people went, oh, the government's hiding. It's really those UFOs, and they don't want to admit it, and you had Project Sign, Grudge, Blue Book, all this, and the government was always denying that it was saucers or UFOs, and the people were just convinced it was. And, the controversy, the denial that it was saucers actually made it more alive in the minds of the public. If the government's denying it so much, and since people are perverse, they want to believe what they shouldn't believe. They want, if you label a book fiction, they want it to be true. And if you label it as true, they go, oh, that's not true, you see. So by the government saying there aren't UFOs, it created UFOs. See, denial. People don't trust the government. They haven't for a long time. So all this stuff about physical nuts and bolts UFOs made it socially acceptable to talk that way and constrained the phenomenon to only appear in those forms. Well, orbs too. But there's a reason for that. But so the very act of trying to deny their cover story made the cover story create the UFOs, so to speak. There's a thing on my website I talk about called the accidental summoning hypothesis. So the mere act of denying UFOs tends to summon UFOs. And more so, if somebody looks out and sees like a plane, but they've got UFO frenzy, they might see a UFO. Their mind puts a coloring on top of it with their hope, right?
Yeah, no, I get it.
But if you study shamanism from like Eliade or other sources, to quote summon something in actuality, you have to fake it until you can make it. You have to make yourself believe it when it's unbelievable until you actually con yourself into believing it. Then once you con yourself into believing it, you might actually be able to summon the thing that wouldn't have been possible otherwise. So that's what all this disclosure stuff is about. There's this, let's call it supernatural substrate that has always lived with us here on Earth. And the government doesn't want people to believe in it because if people realized they were powerful and strong and didn't need the government, well, that
No
government
control,
doesn't.
yeah.
Yeah. So that's why all this disclosure stuff, that's why we're eternally like carrot in front of a donkey. They never let us get what they have, you see, because they don't have anything. The only thing they have is the spooky stuff that they don't want to admit to, like happened on Skinwalker Ranch, for example.
Mm.
They don't want
I'm
to admit to
curious
that.
though. I'm curious about the seed of the first thought of something, because obviously Kevin Arnold, well, I know it's like renowned that he saw the first one, etc. And I can picture what they look like in my head. I can see that famous shot of him going over the mountain, or at least the artist rendition. Um, he must have seen something that wasn't
He did.
natural. Well, not natural in terms of what he thought would have been natural at that point.
Right.
So, what was that then?
Now we'll never actually know. See, there's my honesty there. I'm not going to bullshit you that, you see, people like me, what they tend to do is they tend to get this whole inner mythology and then they try to force it on people. But what they should say is, well, this bit of my inner mythology does seem to map to science and reality if you take this proviso and this theory, and here's why I say this. That's fine, right? That's fair. But people tend to get all anything I say is like Moses, you know. No, 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 no. So there's things I know because I've experienced, and there's things I just highly suspect. So I don't know, but since we live on this planet with a plasma life form, I think it might have been the plasma life form, you know, orbs, so to speak. I think he saw basically orbs,
Okay.
or as they used to call them, will o' the wisps or whatever.
Yeah. No, I get you. So it's an original phenomenon that's always been here. He saw
Right.
that, and then the brain took over, and then the natural part of our brain or whatever our spirit is created this new mask, shall we say,
Yes.
that spawns then the whole phenomena. That's interesting, isn't it? But it does go back to the whole thing which I first mentioned, which is thinking about something, then we could create it, and we are really that powerful that we could create Darth Vader, as an example.
Well, I got one other thing I got to say about that. Platonic surrealism says, and I'm the only person that really knows Platonic surrealism because I'm creating it, right?
Yeah.
Well, I say remembering it. I say remembering it, not creating it. I've got a muse, so I just write it down. But Platonic surrealism says there is no base reality, that physicality is the dream of physicality, that it isn't that we're a simulation in some alien's lab. It's that there are no aliens, there are no labs. There's only the simulation, which is like the mind of God, so to speak. We are thoughts in the mind of God, so to speak. So Platonic surrealism doesn't like to talk about God because God has been so culturally conditioned to be evil, weird, twisted, cruel, you know, killing whole countries of babies and killing the whole world with a flood or real nasty bugger, that one.
Yeah, don't trust anyone with a big white beard. Just don't do it.
No.
Yeah, we'll get into Platonic surrealism. I got a section on that later, but I know you touched on the summoning of UFOs, and that bit from your website really piqued my interest. And I know you've partaken in it. My question to you is, why would you do it? Was it just to see that you could?
Well, as I said, I'd been a part of a spiritual community and was basically thrown out of it because you're not supposed to say that the guru had autism. And I was urged by my muse, I suppose you could say, to look into UFOs because I thought it was a related phenomena. And I didn't even know anything about it. I didn't care about UFOs, right? Didn't care. But then the thought came to me, oh my gosh, this is just the same stuff, same as anything. And so I had a theory that I knew what UFOs were, and I wanted to test it. So I even had a little experimental protocol of my assumptions, of the steps I would take, things that I would do during the event to test. And I just wanted to prove to myself that I wasn't delusional, basically, that I really had a good theory. And this is something that I should devote my life to researching. And the best way to do it is I was convinced I could summon one. I just knew I could. There was no doubt in me, none, zero. I knew I could do it. And it was the hardest thing I've ever done in my life, but I did it. Now, just to touch with current events, other people, they, oh, yeah, I'll summon a UFO when they run out in the woods with like a little laser clicker
Mm.
or pay someone $5,000 and then there's supposed to be a UFO there. I'm not making fun of anyone.
No,
But
SG. Yeah.
yeah, so now, yeah, quote, summoning UFO can be that simple if basically the UFOs already want to show up, or if it's pure bullshit, of course.
Mm.
I mean, pure bullshit half the time. People are so ready to believe they could see a cat and, oh, that's a UFO. I mean, they're just so primed these days. Which, of course, is the accidental summoning hypothesis, right? They're faking it until they make it, you see. That's what's so delicious about this. The US government, by trying to stomp down this metaphysical stuff that they don't want people to know, have actually enhanced it. They've made it a target of belief and made it much stronger. And they have actually made their own lot in life much worse than it would have been. Isn't that just delicious?
Yeah, I like that. It's comeuppance, isn't it?
It really is. So there's what I call simple UFO summoning. And that's when you simply like feel a glow of love in your heart and you let some of it out. And that'll attract something that's attracted to that. That's really that simple. It's easy. Anyone can do it. In fact, like I said in my interview with Jeffrey Mitchell, people do it every day, literally. But what they summon is like grandma. You see, if grandma's dying and you can't get to her in time, if you send your love to her, you might actually feel like you're there with her, right? I mean, there's been so many stories like that, or she's dying, and either right before she dies or after she dies, you see grandma. It's like a vision, or it's like she's actually walking in the room. Well, that's summoning a UFO, my friend. There's a very important concept here that I want people to understand. That even these professional summoners, the Jake Barbers, I don't think they know this, but I want the information to get out there. This is our heritage as human beings. We should try to understand it, right? So there's a thing called hyper objects, and I'm so sorry. There's a gentleman at Rice University and several people who have written all about this, and I'm always forgetting their names. I knew about hyper objects like 20 years ago. I don't read people's books and then take their stuff. I just sit quietly with nature and listen. And about that, lots of people are sensitive to observing nature or just quietly thinking. So this stuff comes out in through multiple people. So, that's why there's people who get Nobel Prizes for doing the exact same thing while they're at other ends of the earth and they may never have collaborated.
Yeah, I've heard this quite a lot, and it's like almost like the crow phenomenon, isn't it? When a crow learns something
Right,
somewhere, it spreads around the globe, and then they all do it. Similar thing, yeah.
right. So hyperobjects, you see, when somebody summons something, really they're summoning a hyperobject. And a hyperobject, in terms of Platonic surrealism, would be a collection of monads. If you read Platonic surrealism, they talks about monads a lot. Monads are a minimal unit of, let's call it spiritual reality, so to speak, a quantization of the spiritual. And or you could call them group souls, you could call it, something like that. It's a shared activity among many forms of life and mind. And these monads might power a million different things simultaneously because they're kind of atemporal. Think of them as like atemporal Boltzmann brains, if you're familiar with that concept.
Oh, sorry, can you just say that again? Temporal
Boltzmann brains.
Boltzmann brains. I've not heard that before.
Okay. So, according to quantum mechanics, almost anything could happen once in the universe, right? Just quantum uncertainty.
Hmm.
So there was the concept, well, why couldn't a whole brain then just appear out of nothingness? And the answer is, well, it would, but it'd be like a brain and it would die. It'd be like probably in the middle of space. Well,
Yeah.
what if this happened outside of time? Say you had an infinite number of monkeys and an infinite number of typewriters, would they eventually give you Shakespeare? I love Hitchhiker's Guide, man. I love Hitchhiker's Guide. And the answer is yes, they would, given infinite time. So monads are like the sentience inherent in time, space, and beyond that have had all this time, because there isn't really time, or time is way different there, to evolve to become very powerful. And that's actually what powers. They are the projectors of worlds like ours. They project them. They are the movie projectors. And they're made of pure thought, in a manner of speaking. So, but back to hyper objects. So, you've maybe noticed that when people have UFO encounters, it's not unusual also to like have their dead grandma show up too. You've probably
Mm.
heard stories about it.
Yeah, they're very much linked, and like Bigfoot and all sorts of things are linked. Yeah.
Yes, that's because these hyper objects power all those things. So if you summon a UFO, you make it grandma too, because they power her as well. They power everything simultaneously. See, that's where the limited human imagination doesn't work. People think, oh, I'll summon a UFO. It's going to be about the size of a 747, look like the Starship Enterprise, and it's going to, rescue me from this awful world. Well, you might get that, but it's attached to 10 trillion other things that it's concurrently powering, including grandma. See, that's when Whitley Strieber talks about, Anne Strieber said this is also about death. Well, she was right. She was right. All this stuff is all connected together underneath the hood. And if you summon one thing, you get a lot of other things with it. That's why when Jacques Vallée writes about, three people see a UFO, one person sees a UFO, one person sees a cow, and one person doesn't see anything. That's because they're all looking at different parts of the hyper object. You see, humans bond with these hyper objects as part of the story of life of the movie that's being projected. So it makes all these things that people think are so hard to understand, they're just dead baby simple. You just got to know a couple of basic concepts.
I need to ask you a question here. So, this is it a concept? Is it a theory that you came up with, or was it something information about this that came through to you via your muse? So,
I've always known this.
okay. So the supplementary question was about the knowing part of it. How did you know it? I know that's almost impossible to answer, but how do you know that to be true?
Because I summoned a UFO and it verified it.
Okay.
See, we can only speak to our own experience, right? I
Sure.
think, therefore, I am. I mean, for all I know, no one else is even real or alive because I am only aware of my own awareness.
Yeah. No, see,
But
Kevin,
that's what
you're not
everybody
real.
says. Yeah. It's like the joke about Descartes going to the bar, but you know that one?
Say that again.
There's a joke about Descartes goes to a bar.
I don't know this one now.
Yeah, Descartes goes to a bar, and then a donkey comes in walking on his hind legs and says, oh, I'll have a shot of bourbon. And Descartes goes, I think not, and promptly disappears.
Yeah, I've not heard that before, I don't think. I like it though. So you've I want to touch briefly, if you don't mind, on your summoning. What happened?
Okay, I'll tell you the whole story.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I didn't even tell the whole story in the book. People always hold back parts. Jeff is always laughing and teasing about that. He can meet someone, get their story, and 30 years later, they're still adding to it.
Is that
Now,
because things are kept back for verification purposes more often than not? Is that what it is?
that's one reason. Or else it's just their conscious rational mind is confabulating about trying to fill in blanks that they really didn't know.
Okay.
That's the other half of it that happens quite a lot. So I came up with a summoning ritual based on Kundalini yoga because, well, I'd recently died actually and came back from the dead. I know it's in the book. Um, and so I knew the power of Kundalini yoga because I had accidentally died due to Kundalini yoga. Because, well, I'll start with that, I guess.
Yeah, please, because I was going to ask you about your NDE anyway, so you might as well like embellish on both.
Well, embellish isn't really the good word there,
Yeah,
but
I know. Yeah, I know. You know what I
elucidate.
mean. Yeah.
I know. So in Kundalini yoga and other systems of yoga, and I will butcher, right? I don't talk to people from the subcontinent of India. I don't know their culture. I'm a filthy Westerner that's been using their ideas, and yeah, I have nothing but respect for the traditions that spawned all this. So, but in those systems, there are forms of contemplation. One is called, and I'll mispronounce it. I'm sorry, I just don't pronounce this stuff right, and I don't tend to talk to people about it because in America we're so spiritually stunted these days. People don't talk about this stuff much anymore. So it's called Savikalpa, something like that. It means contemplation with mind still present. In other words, your personality is still there. That's a form of contemplation. Contemplation being active imagination, so to speak, and not passive vipassana meditation type stuff. And then there's Nirvikalpa or Nirvikalpa samadhi, which means that you are like in the mind of God without your own personality, that you have attained the highest possible form of meditation and your personality is not present. Well, that sounded like what I wanted, right? I mean, it's like I already had some of it because the golden glow never went all the way away from when I was a child, but a lot of it had. So I was looking for it. See, my whole life I was looking for it to come back. So I did the meditation and it worked just fabulously. And as a matter of fact, I died. You see, if you want to be part of the mind of God without interference from your human mind, well, that's called death, you
Mm.
see. And that's the secret of yoga that no one ever tells you. If you want the ultimate realization, you're going to die. And this trendy new age, have a McDonald's cheeseburger while becoming enlightened culture doesn't want to talk about reality. Oh, just buy my book, just say this mantra and you'll be enlightened. Well, yeah, there's a thing where if you want great power, you have to pay a great price, and that price is death. So I didn't know this. Well, maybe I did know it. I have this knowing that's been leaking out of me my whole life, but my conscious rational mind didn't know it till it happened. So yeah, I died. Um, like in the old text, I felt the heat leaving my body from my feet in a wave and going up top of my head. That's how it works. Yogic death. There's a whole death subsystem in human beings for ejecting the dream substance that we accumulate during a lifetime, and then it shoots out the top of the head. So, if you can have a purposeful death, that's how it's best done. It's all in ancient yoga stuff. I never read any of that stuff, by the way, until long after all this happened. Um, so I was dead, and I could see 360 degrees around me. I seemed to be like in outer space, surrounded by stars. And I felt so happy and peaceful, so complete, like this is what I was before I was born, sort of feeling that I was all this. And so I saw the stars, but I knew they weren't really stars. So I took a look at one, and this is freaky. Um, it was a picture of what I saw in a magazine years later of the COVID virus. You see. Yeah, yeah. It was an exact copy of the picture. It was like on Time magazine. So that's what I saw, but I simultaneously saw other things. And this is it's a hyper object, right? It's multiple things. So I was seeing multiple things at once. And Jeffrey Capel and others, Corban, etc., call this the imaginal. You see, they know about the symbolic image overloading. They know about that, right? The the early spiritual geniuses, they knew about this, but they didn't know about hyper objects. And the imaginal is what it is because everything's a hyper object. And so, this was a monad. I was looking at a monad. So you see, when I write about monads in Platonic surrealism, I'm writing about what I saw. So that's how I know it's true. Now, someone could go, oh, you were having delusions from Satan. We can get into that later. It's not even worthy of a dignified response. But so, if you go to platonicsurrealism.com, you can see pictures of monads. There's a link to it, one of the first links. And so then I knew my true nature at that time. Now, I did have one interesting thing I never wrote about in the book. I never saw Jesus. Go figure. Didn't want to.
Fair enough.
And I didn't have a post-life review because, well, that's not how it works. I mean, it can work that way if that's what you want. I didn't have anything I wanted to review. I mean, what I knew and was not that different from what my state as being dead was. It was already halfway synced up. I didn't have to go through all these movies, these filters and personas. I already was halfway aware of all this stuff, even before I died. But the one interesting thing I did experience is a warm voice from behind me. You see, in these NDEs, it's not always, but often a voice behind you. You don't see who's speaking.
Which side?
The reason, what?
Which side behind you? Left or right or directly?
Well, to the left, but since I had 360-degree vision, the fact that I couldn't see what was behind me to my left is kind of puzzling now, isn't it?
Yes. Very much so.
I don't have a good answer for that.
No, but you've answered it to what I was expecting the answer to be. Because I hear it a lot.
What's that?
Yeah. That's where spirit comes from, behind and to the left.
Well, there's a reason for that, because the left side of the body is connected to the right brain hemisphere, which is where our creative source of everything comes from. So it's not surprising, right? There's a precedent there. Well, anyway, the warm voice felt like an uncle, felt like an old friend I'd known a trillion years. He laughed and said, "The kids are always trying to hack it," he said. You see what he was referring to is there was all these streamers. If you look at the pictures on the website, you see the streamers. The streamers are trying to hack the website like little sperm trying to hack an egg, kind of like. They want in to the monad. Well, what that is somebody else's monad trying to join up with another monad. They're trying to talk to each other, but monads are also selfish and self-centered. They've all got the power of God almost, and they don't want their hallucinations, their worlds, their dreams to be disturbed by others. So, yeah, the others are always trying to hack them. See, everybody's thoughts are always trying to get dominance in our minds, right? Memes and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
It's the same thing with monads. And so he was joking. He said, yeah, they're always trying to hack in. And the boys, our offspring is what it felt like. Our offspring is what it felt like he was saying to me. So I take it, I call this voice the gardener because it was like this person is looking after the monad, so to speak. But it felt like an uncle. It didn't feel like me. It felt like maybe, and I'm not going to say more advanced version of me because people go, "Oh, you're so arrogant. You think it's all you." No, I'm not saying that. But if we're all connected with each other, and I've known someone for like a trillion years, I mean, if you're with a close friend, it feels like you're with yourself too, kind of in a way, right? That's all. That's
Hmm.
all I'm saying. And so I had all these realizations while dead, and then, like any good uh, technical documentation person, see, I did a lot. Not probably a quarter of my work in IT for 31 years was documentation. So I got the sudden thought, oh damn, I have to document this. And then boom, I was in my body instantaneously like a rocket landing because I had to document this. My exact thought was, if I don't document this, I'm an asshole. I don't want to be an asshole. I felt an obligation to my fellow man to document this. So I slammed back into my body. Um, it took me about 9 months to recover. See, this wasn't just some little out of body experience. I was dead. Now, was I dead for maybe only 5 minutes and my brain didn't rot? I think that's probably the most likely explanation. I'm not claiming any Jesus type stuff here. My brain hadn't rotted yet. um, but I couldn't move at first because I'd forgotten how to move. I couldn't talk because I'd forgotten how to talk. My limbs were like I was in some diving suit. It just felt so weird. And I didn't know how to talk. It took me 2 hours to be able to stand up for the first time. And it took me about 4 hours to be able to form my first words. I had been dead. And this human body is just one body among many I've lived in. I'd already put it aside, forgotten about it. Done deal. So I had to learn all over again. It took me 9 months to get over the experience. I did go to the doctor. I was thinking, you see, I got to fend off these idiots who just want to go, oh, you had a transient lability event in your temporal lobe. Well, that's why I went and got an MRI. Nothing, dudes, okay? Nothing. No brain damage. Nothing wrong with my brain. Pristine, in every possible way.
So what did the doctors put it down to then?
They didn't know what I was talking about. I was fine.
Hmm.
I mean, I wasn't able to get an MRI for like 6 months because I had to have a reason, you see, and I didn't have a reason that medical science would accept.
Yeah, it makes
So I
sense.
had to wait for something else to come along where I could ask for it.
That's fair. So how linking back this to your summoning then of the UFO, you said that you needed to talk about the NDE because it would help explain some of the UFO summoning. Where does that get back into
Right,
that?
right. Well, you see, due to the NDE, I then knew about hyperobjects because I knew what it likely was a manifestation of a monad, which is a hyperobject. It can appear as anything. So that gave me the impression that whatever I summoned would change shape if I wanted it to. And I wanted to test that. And I did test that as part of the test protocols. But also, due to the fact that I was in effect going to be summoning myself, so to speak, because I'm powered by monads too, right? All
Hmm.
I really had to do is come up with a ritual to, to get my monad's attention and to stick its nose down in this physical matter that it so loves and so hates. See, it's a love hate thing, kind of. Because the world of the monads, um, it's not always pleasant. I mean, there are no hugs and puppy dogs there, right? It's like the cold vacuum of space And if you want to have communication with someone else, they keep you out because they've got their own thing. You see, we're all divinely selfish, so to speak. You know, what's that philosophical term? Um, so it's like you're all that exists in that philosophy. I can't remember the name for that. So, anyway,
It doesn't
people
matter.
know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So that's, by the way, why we come here. Because if we forget we're self-righteous, priggish assholes in the monad realm, you see, in the monad realm, if you're a monad and you want to experience something, it's just you get everything you want instantly because you've got the power of unlimited thought without any limitations to it. So, but what that leaves you is lonely because if with everyone doing that, it's like spiritual masturbation, so to speak.
Mm. Yeah,
You don't get
they
to know
don't
your
need you. They don't need you, so they'd be doing
right.
their own thing. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that's why monads come here because obviously most people don't realize in their conscious rational mind that they're monads coming here and all these things. They blocked it out. And when you're not some high omnipotent being, well, hell, you can get robbed for your lunch money. All sorts of things can happen to you. You have to learn to get along with others and to work together for survival, you see. So that's why we're here. We're lonely and we can't just snap our fingers and get our will here. See, that's part of why I wanted to bring up this stuff. You asked, well, why can't Darth Vader just show up?
Mm.
Well, you see, this world here is a coordinated dream that is being generated by, maybe 800 monads. And it's like a movie plot that's, in fact, people have so much trouble with this. See, we're functionally in a read-only archive. The movie is already played. We're just watching it frame by frame. It's already happened. And the way you know that is when people see the future, it's because, well, it's already happened.
Yeah, they're seeing a different snapshot. Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah. But for us to learn and grow and talk to others and need to depend upon them to grow structures with them, you need to come here where you're not just high omnipotent and you're so limited. You have to learn to have a heart and compassion and all these good things. You can't learn that as a monad. Because a monad could blast the whole universe into non-existence with a snap of a finger. So there's rules for this world because it's a movie. And like the laws of physics are one of the main rules. Because if everyone could just go Darth Vader and he appears, well, you never learn to be a good husband. You never learn to be a good father. You'd never learn to love puppies. So that is typically not allowed. But it is allowed in a certain way if it's kept relatively uncertain. So, for example, let's say that God came down to Earth. And again, Platonic surrealism doesn't really do God, though we can talk about that later if there's time. Um, but if a traditional God came to Earth, then everybody would suck up to this entity. And as a matter of fact, if this entity was as powerful as all that, his mere existence on Earth might erase everyone. Just the raw majesty of divinity, right? Might erase everyone. So that's why that doesn't happen. It's not a very good movie if God comes down and erases everyone and then you have to roll the credits. So that's not allowed. It doesn't make a good movie. So yeah, we're in a movie generated by all of us, really. You see, if you're here, you are one of the co-producers of the movie because you wanted a role in the movie, so you participate. Now, here's the thing about that. So you're thinking, well, why didn't well, especially me, why didn't I have more hair? Why don't I have more money? Why don't I this and that? Well, those movie roles weren't available. Somebody else got them. I mean, there's only so many possibilities and only so many cameos that are possible. And while you and I wanted to be in the movie, and thus we're here, we were one voice among maybe trillions making the movie. So we got our little cameos, and that's what we got. So make the most of it. It's a very rare, precious thing to be here. That's what I say.
No, and that's true, and I like that concept myself. Here's a question for you then: Are we, me and you, the same monad? Because I know you threw out an arbitrary figure earlier of 800. You obviously can't say how many monads there are. Is it one monad gives 100 million people, so it's experiencing all of us at the same time? Do you think that's what it is?
Actually, I have some knowledge about this. Um, when I started writing, and I'd write something, and I gave it to Jeffrey Kapal. I call him Kapal, and his name's Kripal. He's one of my best friends in the world, and I still can't say his name. Am I lame or what? So, um, and he'd say, "Oh, you've been reading Nietzsche," and I go, "Who?" I mean, I don't read. I have now, but I wasn't reading all these philosophers. Oh, you're Schopenhauer today. No. Well, the monads that powered them are also talking to me. See, that's how this works. Artists can hear more than artists can generally hear multiple monads. So, but to answer your question, one monad can power a trillion lives sometimes. On the other hand, sometimes there's a trillion monads powering one life. It's just all the information, how it needs to be squirted around. For example, I've got this arrogant, it seems arrogant, right? I don't think it's actually arrogant. People think I'm arrogant all the time. I don't get that. Um, I feel like that I have been a conduit to finish some of the work of Philip K. Dick. Philip K. Dick was quite an amazing individual, but there's things he didn't know. Well, that's okay. I mean, hell, he generated such amazing content, right?
Hmm.
He was trying to peel the onion, you see. It's a mystical thing. It's a parable about peeling the onion. So if you want to discover your true nature, you peel the onion, you go, okay, I'll rip off this false mask, I'll rip off that false mask. And then what the Eastern religions tell you is if you finish the process, there's nothing left. And that's why Buddhism is, no self, you know. Or they'll say, well, what's left is the universe, the self, Brahman, that sort of thing is what's actually left. And there is no human remnant. Well, all those guys are all kind of wrong. Come on now, we gotta take the brilliance of the past, take the best of it, and continue. That's what these guys would have wanted. They don't want us to just parrot things we don't understand from the past and never advance it. So, in Platonic surrealism, it is recognized that ultimately that only potentiality exists, which there's a page of definitions. There's like a 1.5 page definitions document for Platonic surrealism that everyone who wants to know about this should really become familiar with because it explains everything. But ultimately, all we are is potentiality, which is basically simply like a giant cosmic field of the potential for any property, set of properties, or interactions between properties that could possibly exist. That is potentiality, but it's just the potential for these things. It's not the actuality. So that's the core thing in Platonic surrealism. And it's really hard to argue with that. I'm saying that things potentially exist. Well, how can you disprove that? See, it's almost impossible to actually disprove Platonic surrealism at its core. And then you've got awareness. Awareness is the ability for self-reflection and to build a self and to obviously be aware, to be aware of structure. You see, that's what awareness is. Now, the secret about awareness is one of my favorite things in the world. And that is that the same awareness that builds universes is the same awareness that we have in us. there aren't different kinds of awareness. It's just like, and I never had read him till years after all. I don't read people and then steal their ideas and then cobble it together. No, this just erupts out of me. Um, I almost lost my train of thought. Ah, yes. There's only one awareness, like Bernardo Kastrup says, and he's right. The guy's really bright, by the way. You can't do much better than to read Bernardo Kastrup. He really nails it very frequently, and I always believe in honoring other people because I'm honoring myself. You know?
Yeah, no, no fair.
Yeah. So there's only one awareness, you see. So the same awareness that powers universes is in us. It's one awareness. Now here's the tricky part. Here's where all the religious systems, all the spiritual systems have got it dreadfully wrong. It's true that if you go looking in mysterious other realms, looking for your soul, your Atman, your spiritual essence that you want to ascend to, all this kind of crap, you often won't find anything. You can, but it's actually kind of a delusion, and then you peel the onion and then you realize you were wrong, right? When you peel the onion, you're left with nothing. But are you left with nothing? You're left actually with one thing. You're left with awareness. So you learn that you are not the forms that awareness becomes familiar with. You are that which perceives. And if you want to get all enlightened, there's a whole topic on that. You can just repeat to yourself, I am that which perceives everything. I am awareness itself. I am not a particular form. I am that which perceives all forms. I can enter all forms, but I am not the form. I am awareness. And what's so tricky about this is that our awareness, see, we don't actually have a separate awareness. Awareness stays really quiet so that, and this goes back to the God coming to earth thing, awareness stays really quiet in us so that we can have a life where we dream of being separate and where we can learn and grow. Because if it just manifested all of its unlimited nature, we'd be erased like God coming to earth. So people go looking for God and they go looking for their infinite nature and they go looking for the infinite thing, and it's right here, right now. It's right here between us right now. It has to be quiet, because if it manifested a form, then we couldn't do our own version of play here because it would interfere. It can't let there be the tiniest whisper of its nature in us, or it would override everything in the world. So that's it.
In a nutshell, yeah, that's not a big topic at all, is it, Kevin?
When people do like Zen or whatever, and they feel the scales falling off their eyes, and they see the eye that cannot see itself and realize that they are the eye, they become aware that they are all that. They are the awareness. That's all it is. Once you know that, everything becomes possible, like summoning UFOs.
Yeah, but that's a big thing to think of. Just like the UFO summoning thing, you have to train you have to unlearn what you have learned, essentially. And to coin a Star Wars phrase, it's that. And that's very, very, very hard to do. Because we're basically brainwashed, aren't we, in this existence from beginning to now.
There's 3 practices in Platonic Surrealism that can help remove a lifetime of bullshit. Clean you up if you want to do them.
Well, yes, but also, before I say yes, are there implications to this reality now that will piss, bugger me up?
Yes.
And therein becomes the problem. Like people say, be careful what you wish for, especially in
They're
relation
right.
to the UFO topic. If I start thinking, oh, I really want contact with an alien species, and then all of a sudden I get abducted and stuff, and then I perceive that as negative, or those become a negative experience, do I want that? My honest answer right now is no.
Yeah, I don't recommend this sort of thing for the average soccer mother.
Mm.
I don't. I mean, honestly, people who take things as far as people like me who've taken them, like I've taken it, they usually they usually have bad things happen to them. There's just a lot of reasons why this is dangerous stuff, and it makes people uncomfortable. And when people get uncomfortable, they want to silence you. So all the great, and I'm not classing myself on the same level, but I'm not.
That's okay.
I just got a taste of this, right? I'll be wrong. I just got a taste of this stuff. But the really great historical figures, what happened to them all? Why, gosh. I mean, Socrates was a great figure, and he was killed. Plato had to run for his life. But let's not even talk about Jesus. I mean, literally, I could say a lot about Jesus. I won't. It's been so distorted, that whole subject. I could talk for 12 hours about early church history, cultural implications going back to forever, what it all actually meant. Was it important? Was it
I
not
don't have
important?
12 hours, Kevin. Sorry. We'll have to give that one a miss.
Yeah,
That'll save you.
fine.
Before we enter the Koit zone, we got 5 minutes before we get into some random questions. I do want to talk about the link between trauma and the paranormal, or supernormal, as you refer to it as. And we don't need to get into the deep weeds here, because like I said, we've only got 5 minutes. What is the link, and why is there a link?
Right. This sounds awful, but I'm going to say it anyway. In some ways, this world is like a meat tenderizer machine. We come into this world with all these pre-existing, the Buddhists call them brain. I've been running my brain pretty high during this interview of what I should say, what I shouldn't say, to say things as best I can. They're the pre-existing conditions you come into life with. This world is like a meat tenderizer machine. All the suffering makes the dross fall off you. The suffering is intentional. This is a world that you're supposed to suffer in. And the only people that don't suffer much are kind of monstrous. I won't go into that topic. We talked about that before the show.
Yeah.
So, yeah, suffering loosens the self-delusions. If you come into this world remembering faintly, oh, I'm a monad, I can do anything. Well, you get hit by a bus. You see, reality hits you in the face. And you have to learn that if you want to deal with others, you have to have limitations. You have to learn to play nice. So that's why the Catholic saints, for example, would self-flagellate, because the more they suffered and the more they endured it, two things were happening. One, the dross was falling off, their own self-delusions about what's important. But two, their dream body, their plasma body, felt like it wanted to leave. If you're suffering, you want to die, right? I mean, if it's bad enough, right? So they purposely made themselves want to suffer so bad they wanted to die, and that expelled their dream self, their true self, like part way to the afterlife. That's how they could do their miracles. So that's the secret. That's the secret of trauma.
Just to suffer so that we can get back to the originality of what we are.
Right. Right.
Doesn't that in some ways almost negate the reason we come here? Because we want to. It's like we come here and then but we desperately want to get back there. That's weird in itself.
Right. Yeah, well, that's the nature of life now, isn't it? You want to have your cake and you want to eat it too.
Yeah, true that. With trauma, is our psyche breaking down or cracking, and then we see through the mask?
That is also a good way to put it. Yes. You see, the walls of Plato's cave are made of words. That's a key phrase to keep in mind. It's our treasured concepts that blind us to what's real, because it's actually nonverbal what's real. When I was dead, there was no verbal. I didn't have a brain to make words with.
There was no floating mouth in space, was there? Yeah.
No, there wasn't.
Yeah.
No.
As a high IQ artist, which you self-describe, what are your special powers? And I don't mean that flippantly again. I mean, do you have like a photogenic memory or whatever? Are you good with numbers? How does that work for you?
Right, right. When I was young, I didn't know it. Oh, this is funny. I thought I was psychic, right? And I kind of was. I was in my mother's mind and she was in mine, just like in the telepathy tapes. It's really true. Jeff had asked me about, is this legitimate? And I said, yeah, I experienced all this when I was young, but then it fades. It fades through that 7-year-old thing. But here's what's funny. You wanted to know what my savant power was? Yeah, I had one.
Hmm.
It was memory. So it was still fading. You see, the more you socialize, the more it fades. The more I was around other people, the more it faded. But I did go to Reno once, and I could tell what the cards were going to be coming up. And I thought I was psychic, right? I thought I was seeing the cards in my mind. Well, no, I'd memorized the decks. And I won. I put down $200 and I won $35,000. And then men with bulges near their armpits came and got me and threw me out for counting cards. And I go, what? See, I thought I was psychic. That was it. So I always had this ridiculous memory. But here you saw me. I couldn't remember solipsism. That was the word. I
Oh,
couldn't
well done.
remember that. Well, I'm 63 years old, and my autistic savant ability faded, as happens. If you get really socialized, it all goes away. It's part of the standard science. So I've still got a really great memory, but that was my power, super memory,
Is
and
another question.
apparently this spiritual awareness. I would say, you see, my autistic obsession was this stuff. They have perseverations, autistic people do, and this was mine.
Hmm.
What's the nature of reality was and the openness to this stuff was my superpower.
A damn great goal as well. Um, One final question on autism before we move into the Koit zone. Is autism, or I mean, I say obviously it's a current label that we put on this condition, is that the default state of humanity, or is it a flaw, if we could call it that?
That's interesting. I have papers. I hope you go to my website if you're interested
I
and
have
read
been
all
on
these
it.
papers. Oh,
Your
okay.
website is chock full of stuff that needs to be digested hard. Do you know what I mean? It's very
Yeah,
deep
yeah.
stuff.
Right. So what happened is back when Earth was more of a paradise for human beings before the population bottleneck, uh, people were in small villages and hunter-gatherer packs, and they were like one mind with each other. They didn't have all this strong ego because ego would have separated themselves from each other, and they would have been a less efficient hunting gathering pack if they had an ego. But then the population bottleneck hit. There was a war in Europe where 95% of all men killed each other because resources were starting to fail due to various events. We don't have time for this. But in short, the human ego developed as a defense mechanism against other humans, mainly. When larger and larger numbers of humans were fighting over smaller and smaller resources, and they were all crammed together in the first villages after the Neolithic era, they had to develop the ability to defend themselves against other humans. Instead of wild animals being the main threat, it was other humans that were the main threat. So that's why humans evolved to lie to each other so beautifully. Because you almost can't open your mouth as a human being without lying. I mean, it's just so prevalent, right? Um, and you're always tracking other egos against your ego to see where you fit into the pecking order, where aspects of your personality will get you in trouble, that sort of thing. And so that form of suffering of human predation on humans is what developed the ego. And that is a persona that is destroying us. And if we don't get over that, we don't have 300 years left on this planet. Not even. We're going to destroy ourselves because we've forgotten who we are. We've forgotten we're all one people.
I agree on that, but do you think that sufficiently answers what I asked? I know that sounds horrible me saying it like that, but is the default state of humanity an autistic view of it, or is it what we would class as a normal person's mind? Where do you sit on that?
Right. Something like autism was our original default state.
Okay, so
Like
we were,
autism.
yeah, and we've lost a lot of that along the way because of the ego etc. that
Right.
you mentioned added into it. I see. Yeah. Yeah, I like that. That's good. Like I can run with that one. Thank you very much. Right, we are now entering the Koit zone. Koit zone! And in the Koit zone, I will ask you random and pointless questions, Kevin. So just answer best you can. Here we go. What was the last thing you bet on?
Ouch. As in money or just I predict?
Yeah, let's go with money.
Uh, when I was in Reno
The
and
cards thing.
played blackjack, that was the last time. I was about 20 years old. So it's been 43 years since I physically bet on something.
Wow, amazing. What is your favourite film?
The Invention of Lying by Ricky Gervais.
Oh, yeah, that's quite a cheeky film, that one, isn't it? Yeah, yeah, I know the one. It's a lovely one. Very, very apt based on what we're doing here today. I'm tasking you with going to the supermarket, buying 5 items only, and coming back and making some food for yourself. So, what are you buying and making?
Right. I get pasta because I'm addicted to it. I get pre-bottled um, Alfredo sauce because I don't make it from scratch. I'm not really a cook. I mean, I am a cook, but I just use component. I don't do it from
No,
scratch.
fair play.
And I get some chicken because I like me mushroom chicken. I get some mushrooms. And since I'm addicted to caffeine, I get some diet soda.
Fair play. You bang on. Well done, you. Um, as a mad scientist, which is another label you've put on yourself, presumably you've made ace things for your house. Any stories? Anything you've created?
For my house?
Yeah.
Build, you mean?
Yeah, Bill.
Ah, no. Can I? Uh, I
Yes,
mean,
you can.
when I was a kid, I had an electronics lab and I did weird experiments in it when I was a kid. Um, and when I was in computer and networking, I had a rack of, to get my Cisco certifications, I built my own networking and firewall rack, etc. But no, in recent years, I mean, I wish I had the budget and some collaborators and I could do some really interesting things. But no, I don't have anything. But I would like to mention I have, I didn't build it, nature built it, but I've got this big, massive collection of trilobites from 350 million years ago. And it's my prized object. It's in an art niche. And I've been admiring it for years and I finally got it. It shows where we came from, in terms of the movie. So that's my favorite. I didn't build it, but it really speaks to my personality as something important in my home.
No, no, fair play. I love a good trilobite fossil myself. It's one of the early ones I found when I was like 6 or 7. I love them myself. Um, Speaking of mad scientists, who is the most evil cartoon character that you could imagine taking over the world?
Wow, that's a great question. Um, Maybe somebody like Sweet Polly Purebred. You see, it's the ones that pretend to be good that are actually the most evil of them all.
Always the case, isn't it? Beware the quiet ones, they say. I don't know that cartoon character, so what's it called?
Underdog.
All right, I don't know it.
Yeah,
I'll look it up. Maybe
it's
an
ancient.
American thing. Um, what animal are you most scared of?
Humans.
Good answer. And do you know what? I knew you were going to say that. I had that ready in my mind that you were going to answer that one. What is the best smell?
The smell when I'm cuddled up with my family, with my wife and my puppy dog, that kind of pack odor of all our odors being mixed together as we cuddle.
Pack odor. I love that. I'd have never guessed that one. Night or day for you?
100% night. I have sensory overload issues. So I love the stars and I love night. I love it very much.
It's good for focusing the mind. I think the same. Same as you. Um, One day you wake up, you look in the mirror, but instead of seeing your reflection, you see yourself as a boy and have the ability to talk to your younger self. What are you telling him?
Already happened. Hang on, help's coming.
Do you know what? I can't leave that thread. Could you tell that story quite quickly? If you know, be brief, but
Eric Wargo time loops. Um, I had a lot of really hard times as a boy. And a few times this golden presence came over me. And it wasn't until later I realized it was my future self comforting my past self.
have you reached that point now in your existence where you now realize you've just gone back to speak to your younger self?
Yes, yes, twice so far.
Really? Wow.
Mhm.
Is that is it mixed somehow with deja vu, or is it a separate phenomenon, do you think?
That's a separate thing.
Okay. Wow, that's amazing. Well played, you. That is the end of the Koit Zone, so thank you for participating in that. We have two final questions. What else do you like to do in your downtime?
I like watching Japanese horror movies. Japanese monster movies, rather, the Keiju movies.
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah.
I like that. And I like playing with my puppy. He's very playful. And just hanging with my wife. I like walking to the park. Um, yeah, I like to just get away from all this intellectual activity, you know.
Oh God, you've got to recharge. That's
I
100%.
do. I
Yeah,
do.
no, I'm with you on that one. Last thing, upcoming projects. What are you currently working on? Is there something that is yet to see the light of day, even on your website and stuff that you're working on?
Well, honestly, I'm waiting to see if I'm going to get any collaborators of people that want to continue exploring what I have to offer. And I'm thinking the answer is going to be no. You
Oh,
see, um, part of my journey here is to realize that maybe this platonic surrealism was only ever for me, and that there might be half dozen people inspired by it. But you see, the monads, they get this thing in their head. They think they're Jesus coming to earth or something, and that people should just listen to them and they can fix everything. But you see, that's the whole thing with platonic surrealism. The world is broken by design. It's not supposed to be fixed. It's supposed to cause suffering so that we eject all this bad stuff we've been accumulating for millennia, and so that we can learn to be humble and loving and how to interact with others. Nobody's supposed to just show up, snap their fingers, and everybody's got, a Tesla in their garage or whatever. It's not supposed to be that way. People want that. The world is designed not to do that.
it was one of the questions I was going to ask you earlier. Like, if we're on a path to evolution and get better as a species, in theory, a lot of the suffering should wane away. But obviously, from what you're saying, that will never happen because you have to have those hurdles to cross.
Uh, the nature of suffering will change. I
Mm.
mean, if we got our stuff together, it became like a Star Trek future, then replicators, nobody would starve, everybody to have clothes. But instead, in our world, the tech bros want to take all the resources, food out of the mouths of school children and whatnot to make themselves richer. They don't want to give us the Star Trek future. They're trying to just wipe out anyone who gets in their way. So I wish it was different, but damn, this is a horror movie world I've found myself in here, and you too.
Mm.
Now, does it have to be that way? No. Could it change still? It could. I don't know. I don't peer ahead because if I did, it'd ruin the movie. And, and maybe
I
I
like
don't know
that.
how. Maybe I don't know how, though I have seen the future before, but maybe I don't really know how.
Mm.
I'm not that great at summoning UFOs, by the way. It really was hard on me.
A
Oh,
topic
by the
for
way,
another. Go on.
mine was not a standard UFO summoning. We can go into that another time if you want me back.
I would love to. I had so much more to ask you, and you have mind-bending topics, which I actually like because it's fertile new ground for my mind, which I love to go into. And also, I want to say, when you said earlier to me that you're 50-50, 50 logic, 50 mind, I have always said I'm exactly the same, and I like to hear that. So thank you for that. That meant something to me. Kevin, thank you ever so much for appearing today. To everyone watching, check the links in the description. You can go to Kevin's site and learn more about Platonic Surrealism and all that wonderful stuff that he's just talked about. Kevin, thank you ever so much.
Thank you, sir.
Cheers, and I will stop that one there. To watch other KoitCast episodes, please click the image top left. To subscribe to my channel, please click the image top right. Please like and share to help KoitCast grow, and most importantly of all, please click the notification bell so you never miss an upload.